occurred in that are occurring in this province today, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that there will be some enlightenment on that today. They say they are opposed to the privatization of liquor stores, of which we have had for decades in this province in rural communities. But their SALGA critic actually asks the government for more private liquor stores, Mr. Speaker. They voted in favour of the Firearms Act, but a couple weeks later we saw the member for Saskatoon-Nutana said that she actually opposed the Firearms Act. That same NDP member also came out against municipalities to have the right to allow, at their choosing, alcohol consumption in their provincial parks, even though other NDP members called for this change and actually publicly supported it. Again, a variable view. That same NDP member, Mr. Chair, called for the legalization of more illegal drugs in Saskatchewan, which we did see them recently do in NDP British Columbia. So today would be a great opportunity for the NDP leader to tell us which exactly harmful drugs that an NDP government, heaven forbid, would legalize in this province. Mr. Chair, that's just a short list, and there's more to come of the NDP's inconsistent and crystal cloudy positions on a number of issues that are very important to Saskatchewan residents. And I look forward to discussing both the government's position and the opposition's position on these, as well as many other important topics over the course of the next few hours.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is indeed an honour to rise for the first time as the Leader of the official opposition and enter into Premier's estimates. I'd like to thank the Premier for his opening remarks, and I'd like to thank his officials for joining us here today. In some of that preamble, I worry that the Premier is torqued up with some spin for perhaps a fight that doesn't exist. I want to talk about the people of this province. I would like to talk about that Premier's record and look forward to the bright future that I think we all can agree that we want for ourselves and for our children in this province, Mr. Chair. There is untapped potential in this province. We have an amazing abundance of resources, and the most precious resource we have in this province are the people who live here. No matter how long people have chosen, how long people have lived on these lands in this province, it's been generations back to the time immemorial, or those who've just come, Mr. Speaker, we are incredibly lucky. And it is an incredible honor to get to stand here in this place. Not something I ever thought would happen, Mr. Chair, when I was growing up on the farm, but it is an honor. And I want to say, when I was first elected, I remember thinking about how do you represent the views of 10,000 people? Well, here we are now. How do you represent the views of over 1 million people in this province, on a landmass larger than Germany? I think the only way that you can even hope to get close to that is by listening to people, by hearing from them, and sharing not only their concerns and their frustrations, and there certainly are those, Mr. Chair, but their hopes, their dreams. And I can't tell you how proud I am. It's often remarked, it is a small team over here, but you've got a group of dedicated people who do just that. The questions that we bring today are focused on those conversations that people have had with us, that we've been privileged enough to hear. They're focused on this Premier's record, and they're focused on the potential that we see in this province, Mr. Speaker. And sometimes, government needs to give people a hand. Sometimes they need to get out of the way. But they always must have as their North Star the well-being of people in this province today and into the future. So you'll find that's where the majority of my remarks are focused. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the chance to slow it down, to retreat from some of the spin, the vitriol, because I think the people of this province deserve to hear real answers and not that spin. With that, my first question. In the Premier's opening comments, he mentioned year-over-year GDP growth. We've heard it a few times. Could the Premier please share with the committee what Saskatchewan's GDP was each year that he's been in office? 5 years. Was it 2018? What was it in 2018? What was it in 2022?
It was 5.7.
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Chair, just pulling some numbers on various years here, as we don't have the list of the years. But what I would say is if you go back to 2007, when we formed government, about $65.9 billion was the GDP of the province. In 11, when I was first elected, it was $72.6 billion, and this past year was $81.8 billion, Mr. Speaker. If you go more recently, Mr. Speaker, over the course of the last 5 years, in those last 5 years, there's been some challenges that have been faced here in Saskatchewan, I would say, but not just in Saskatchewan, all of them. However, some of them are more exclusive to maybe we would say the rural or prairie provinces, Mr. Speaker. And the first of that was a drought, a generational drought in 2021, had an impact on Saskatchewan's GDP. The second, I think, was more broadly an impact across the nation and likely around the world, and that was a global pandemic in 2020, where there was some unprecedented decisions that were made by this government and many other governments across Canada and around the world. So more recently, Mr. Speaker, I would point to a few things. In 2020, there was a general election in this province, and that was as we were finding our way, navigating our way through a global pandemic just prior to a generational drought in the year prior to that generational drought that impacted our agricultural economy here. And the ballot question in that election was who was best to lead that recovery, Mr. Speaker? Who was best to lead the economic recovery here in the province that we live and love? Mr. Speaker, who was best to lead the pandemic recovery as we found our way through that very unprecedented time, Mr. Speaker? And as people of the Saskatchewan, they spoke in that election, Mr. Speaker. And since that time, what we are seeing is unprecedented investment into various industries, climbing the ag value add chain, Mr. Speaker, one of the largest single investment in the province of Saskatchewan in the development of what will be the largest potash mine in the province. Mr. Speaker, we're seeing investment back into our forestry industry, investment back into our energy industry so that we can do what we do best, which is provide global energy and food security to not only our allies but to all around the world, Mr. Speaker. More notably to this last year, as our nation and the world finds themselves economically fully recovering from a global pandemic, what we are seeing here is our GDP growth in this province is leading the nation last year and forecast to lead the nation this year. 5.7% was the growth in 2022. That was top in the nation. Second was Alberta at 5.1%, Mr. Speaker. And I think it's notable that there wasn't one other province that crested the 4% mark. And so you had these two outliers in Alberta at 5.1, Saskatchewan at 5.7, and no other province even cresting 4% in the GDP growth from last year. So as we look out to this next year, we see a number of different economic quotes from folks that are watching these sorts of things very closely, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to read a couple of, or Mr. Chair, read a couple of those in. First is from the Conference Board of Canada, and it's from April 16th of this year. The government has made it clear that the fiscal plan is to return to budget to balance, but there are still funds available to help build a strong Saskatchewan. RBC, the Canadian Economic Outlook in March of this year, said the province led the country last year in GDP growth, and we expect a sharp increase in capital investment, which will keep that expansion going. Mr. Chair, TD Economics had this to say: Saskatchewan should be one of the nation's growth leaders in 2023. And so what I would say is, as we ran that last election, the provincial election in 2020, we ran very much on that ballot question of who is best to recover economically and who is best to recover from a global pandemic in this province. We feel the people of the province have made their selection in that election. We have followed up with our actions by making every effort to attract investment into our province, whether that be through engagement with our international trade offices, engagement with ministers or myself in markets of interest around the world. And I very much would say that that investment is landing here today. I mentioned the potash mine, BHP, $12.5 billion, largest single investment ever to land in the province. Largest investment by the largest mining company that the largest mining company in the world has ever made, largest single investment BHP has ever made. We see foreign mining proposing a net zero copper mine in the northeastern portion of our province, Mr. Speaker. We see the forestry industry expanding in Carrot River. We see the forestry industry making additional investments in the Prince Albert area. That has precipitated decisions made by the Minister of Highways to upgrade some of our forestry roads that are used by the forestry industry, but are also used by families that are experiencing and touring our province's beautiful north. We are seeing value-added investment, Mr. Speaker, in particular in agricultural value-added investment, and most notably in the canola, but not only, but most notably in the canola crush sector, with Cargill building their facility just west of the city. Mr. Speaker, at the Global Transportation Hub, we see Viterra going to begin building what would be the largest canola crush facility in the world, AGT partnering with federated cooperatives, another expansion to Cargill's facility in Saskatoon, and we see both Richardson and Louis Dreyfus doubling the capacity of their facilities. And I would say on that front, and the engagement that we're having in areas around the world and with folks that are investing in that ag value-added space, Mr. Speaker, that the story is just beginning. And we are in the very early chapters of what I think is going to be a tremendously exciting and successful book for Saskatchewan people, continuing to attract that investment, attract those jobs, ultimately attract people to live here, and so that we can continue to grow the number of jobs, grow the number of people, and ultimately grow the opportunities for our own children that live here in the province. And so, Mr. Speaker, the growth since 2007, when we had the opportunity and the honour to form government, has been about 24%. It was 5.7% last year, Mr. Speaker, and forecast to continue to grow into the foreseeable future.
We recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chair, I always love a good next year country story, sometimes a good fable about the olden days. But my question was to the Premier about his record, his 5-year record on the GDP in this province. I found the answer. So the answer is, since this Premier took office, the size of Saskatchewan's GDP has actually shrunk by $560 million. That is a 0.7% shrinkage. So not only is that not growth that works for everyone, Mr. Chair, that's not even growth.
Right.
And, you know, that's unfortunate. It doesn't surprise me because we've been out, as I noted, talking with people, hearing from people, and certainly as much as they do have optimism and you know, are ready to dig in and get after that opportunity that is out there, people in this province are feeling the effects of a shrinking economy over the last 5 years since the Premier took office. So my question is simply this to the Premier: why is the economy in this province smaller today than it was when he took office?
Good question.
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I walked through the last number of years with respect to GDP growth, which is one marker, Mr. Speaker, but thankfully in this province, unlike, say, many other provinces and many other governments, Mr. Speaker, across Canada and to my knowledge around the world, this is a government that continues to set targets, long-term targets for not only the economic growth in our province, but also what people expect to see from their provincial government and what they envision their province to look like in a decade out, for say. And I remember the first time that we went through the exercise of consulting and talking to Saskatchewan people. Leader of the Opposition's correct. You need to talk and listen to Saskatchewan people. It was in 2012, shortly after I was elected, where we as MLAs went out to our various constituencies and talked to people about if we were to set targets for our province, economic targets, job targets, population targets, level of service targets, quite frankly. What would our communities look like across the province, and ultimately what would our province look like then more collectively? Well, we achieved many of those targets, setting them out to the year 2020. Mr. Speaker, some of those population targets, some of those economic targets were ridiculed by the opposition of the day, Mr. Speaker, and as we found our way to 2020, which was shortly after I assumed this chair, Mr. Speaker, we undertook for a second time, a consultation process with our constituents across Saskatchewan as to now if we looked out to 2020. Let's now look out to 2030. What does our communities, collectively our communities, what does our province, what is it going to look like out to the year 2030? And so we put in place, and it's a well-known public document, our plan for growth out to the year 2030, Mr. Speaker. And so we've done some work over the course of the last number of months looking at some of the targets that were in that plan, or in that document, Mr. Speaker, and have we started to work towards, and are we on track to achieving those targets? And so, like I said, my previous answer was where we've been in this province, how we've managed through a pandemic, ask the people of the province for their support at the ballot box in deciding who is best to recover. To economically recover this province after a global pandemic. Mr. Speaker, we've put in place the targets that govern and steer our decisions as a caucus and as a cabinet and as individuals in this government on how now can we work towards achieving these targets alongside the Saskatchewan people. And so one of the most notable targets in that document, Mr. Speaker, was built on a plan for growth target of 1.2 million people by the year 2020. Of which we achieved in 2022, Mr. Speaker, a couple of years late, but again, 200,000 people higher than when we had the honour to form government. Target of 1.4 million people out to the year 2030. In the updated document, Mr. Speaker, we've grown over 20,000 people since December 3rd when we achieved that 1.2 million people, and we are on track. We are on track to reach 1.4 million people in the year 2030. To grow our private capital investment in Saskatchewan to $16 billion annually. That is a significant growth, Mr. Speaker. We are on track. We are at $14.3 billion in total investment. 10.4 is private capital investment, Mr. Speaker. That was in 2022. In 2023, we're at $13.2 billion in private capital investment, Mr. Speaker, a significant growth year over year, and on track to ultimately achieve that target, to increase the value of our exports from this province by 50%. We're not on track for that target, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, because we achieved it. We have grown our export value by 50% far before we reached the 2030 growth target year. We had a target to grow the number of international markets into which Saskatchewan exports would be more than $1 billion. Again, we're not on track to achieve that. We've achieved it, Mr. Speaker. Most notable of those is our largest trading partner, of which was announced today that we set a record value of exports going to the United States of America just today. We set a target to grow Saskatchewan's agri-food exports to $20 billion, Mr. Speaker. This is the operations of what that campaign platform ran on, Mr. Speaker. And we had the target to grow Saskatchewan's agri-food exports to $20 billion. We're on track to achieve that. Increase crop production to 45 million metric tons. Livestock cash receipts, $3 billion. On track to achieve that, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair. Increase our agriculture value-added revenue to $10 billion, very much on track, and we'll be achieving that with the investments that I spoke of earlier. Increase our crush capacity of canola to 75% of the canola that we grow in the province, definitely on track for that number. To process 50% of the pulse crops that Saskatchewan produces, on track to achieve that number. Double the meat processing and animal feed value in revenue to more than $1 billion. Not on track, Mr. Chair, because that goal has been achieved already. increase the oil production by 25% to 600,000 barrels a day. We're on track to do that despite having a pandemic year where we saw the price of oil go to negative $7.50, Mr. Chair. So you could actually take a barrel of oil and a little bit of money to go buy a Starbucks coffee, and that's the only way you could get rid of the thing, Mr. Chair. Even despite that type of a challenging economic environment, we are still on track to achieve 600,000 barrels per day, which would put us very solidly in the second pole position of being the second largest oil producer, of which we are today in the nation of Canada. To increase the annual value of uranium sales to $2 billion, very much on track in providing that energy security for today and, yes, tomorrow to our allies around the world. To increase the annual value of potash sales to $9 billion, not on track for that because we've achieved it already. To double the growth of Saskatchewan's forestry sector, very much on track with the investment that we see arriving in the province. To grow Indigenous participation in Saskatchewan's natural resource industries, very much on track with that. And I would say with some of the initiatives that are in place, like the Indigenous Finance Corporation, Mr. Chair, we're not only going to see increased employment in our natural resource sector, Indigenous employment, but increased Indigenous ownership, emulating what the successes that we've seen in, for example, the forestry industry, where 30% of the allocation, the forest management areas are allocated to Indigenous companies and Indigenous communities. And now what we've seen follow that is 30% of the employees in the forestry industry are Indigenous, and 30% of the companies that are operating in the forestry industry also Indigenous owned, Mr. Chair, and we want to emulate that across many of the other natural resource industries that we have. To increase the value of our manufacturing exports by 50%, not on track for that target, Mr. Chair, it's achieved. To invest $30 billion in infrastructure over the next decade. Most certainly on track. In fact, we're ahead of our target when it comes to highways investment, hospital investment, and education investment. Which brings me to the next one, to build and upgrade 10,000 kilometres of highway. Again, we're ahead of track on that target. And to keep the budget balanced here in the province has always been a North Star of ours. We've had some challenging times, like the last few years, where we had to run a deficit for a couple of years during the pandemic to support Saskatchewan businesses, in particular small businesses, through a very challenging time, but also to support Saskatchewan families and to support our education sector, to support our healthcare sector through what was really unprecedented times. We have returned not only to balance, but have returned to a surplus situation. We have taken those surpluses and are paying off that pandemic deficit that we acquired, Mr. Chair. We also are going to continue in the advancement, and this was part of our growth plan goal, to advance the development of zero-emission small modular reactors, of which we very much are at the forefront of, alongside New Brunswick, alongside Ontario and Alberta, in pushing along small modular reactor technology. We don't have many hydro opportunities here. Folks, maybe even some opposite, might think that we can run this place on windmills and solar panels, but we most certainly cannot. It doesn't provide baseload power. We either need coal-fired power, we either need natural gas-fired power, or we're going to need something like a small modular reactor to provide that baseload power for Saskatchewan residents, and that's why we have stepped into this space, because it's one of the only realistic options that we have moving forward. And I would just say, in advent of the next week or two, that most certainly this is an area where we are going to differ from some of the federal government's targets that they have out there with respect to phasing out of coal by 2030, not realistic, phasing out of natural gas by 2035 with their clean electricity standard, most certainly not realistic, not affordable, and not achievable, Mr. Chair, and we'll have more to say on that over the course of the next few weeks. Mr. Chair, I would just say there's many more of these. There's many more of our growth plan targets, of which we are on track to achieve, or many that we have already achieved, and we may have to reset some of those targets long before 2030. But that is only possible. It's only possible due to a government that is wholly focused on on an attractive investment environment, only focused on, yes, recovering after a couple of very challenging times. We had a generational drought in this province. We had a global pandemic that did impact folks operating in our communities, operating businesses in our communities, did impact our healthcare sector, did impact our education sector. But Mr. Chair, what I would say is in the advent and the post-environment of that pandemic and that drought, that Saskatchewan most certainly is poised, if not is poised. We are, in this year, leading the nation in GDP growth, and we are poised to continue to lead the nation for years to come.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chair, lost in that answer, I guess, from the Premier is the fact that Saskatchewan, over the course of the premiership of that Premier, has shrunk by 0.7%, and we are one of only 2 provinces to have seen negative growth over that time. But I'll shift, Mr. Chair, for fear that he's going to give the same answer again. Shifting to jobs, Mr. Chair, how many people were employed in February 2018 when that Premier came to office as compared to April 2023?
I recognize the Premier.
Newtown.
I'm going to go through a number of facts and figures here, Mr. Chair. Starting again, at the time we had the opportunity to form government here, 506,000 jobs in the province. I'm happy to report today we're up about 75,000 jobs above that number. About just under 580,000 jobs currently here today. That number was 554,000 in February of 2018. Mr. Chair, this is precisely what we have been focused on in attracting investment and creating a more solid relationship with our export markets around the world to ensure that we can preserve not only the jobs that we have here today, but preserve the rate of growth that we have in those jobs in the province. We have, I got lots of numbers going on here. So far this year, we're up about 5,600 jobs in the province. That's unprecedented growth. That's building on 20,000 jobs last year, and I would say that unprecedented growth is going to continue for some period of time. As we brought up sasjobs.ca, there's 18,006 job openings here in the province, so I'm sure there's many folks, Canadians and international residents that are eagerly watching the estimates in Saskatchewan this afternoon, and I take the opportunity to invite each of them to visit the sasjobs.ca website and look for a career for them and their family to make their home here in this province. They have incentives if they are to move here. For example, the graduate retention program, of which the member for Saskatoon University said that they would do away with. A tax incentive of about $20,000 over a number of years will essentially refund to you much of the tuition costs that you had if you live and reside and work right here in the province of Saskatchewan. It's unique to this province. No other province has a graduate retention program, and I would say that it's working and working very well. Alongside those jobs, Mr. Chair, come people. Come a lot of people, actually. 212,532 of them. That's an old number. It's actually over 221,000 people that have arrived here in the province since 2007. And this is an interesting number, actually, Mr. Chair, and I just take a moment, because I think at the end of the day, at the very core of the growth agenda, the plan for growth that we have, it's about people. It's about attracting people, creating jobs in this province, having the private sector create jobs. People move here to fill those jobs. They move their families here and ultimately become part of the very fabric of our community. It's been the success of our province for literally years, and I would even say decades now. And so herein lies the opportunity for us to compare. To compare 16 years under the members opposite versus the most recent 16 years under the current administration. And so under the members opposite, in 1991, 1,207,713 people lived here. In 07, 1,200,086. So net loss, 627 people. About 100 people a year, not quite, 85 maybe. People a year leaving the province. I remember actually driving to my beloved Oilers games in Edmonton, and you'd see on the back of the sign, the back of the Welcome to Alberta sign was, "Would the last one leaving Saskatchewan please turn out the lights?" I remember that sign very well as a youth driving to Edmonton, Mr. Chair. Thankfully, we were just there for a hockey game and didn't stay. We came back to this province. You compare that to the last 16 years, Mr. Chair, with a plan for growth target of achieving 1.2 million people, of which we did December 3rd in 2022, and well over 21,000 people, 23,000 people have moved here even since that date. Over 220,000 people have made their home in the province, relative to about an 85-person loss per year under the members opposite, and I think that is really telling, and it's about all we need to say on where this province is today, where this province is going tomorrow, versus where this province was a decade and a half ago.
Here, here.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm starting to get the impression that the Premier doesn't exactly want to answer my questions or talk about his own record, but good thing I was able to find those answers, and the answer is, in that period, during the Premier's term, We saw job growth February of 2018, 565,000. By April of 23, that number was 587,000. At 0.5, Mr. Chair. That represents 4% growth, which is the lowest growth in the country. But I have to move on to some other questions here. That again, these are the questions that people in this province have indicated to us are important to them. These are the concerns that they've come to this legislature, Mr. Chair, many times to talk about. Not easy to do, especially, and I'm going to talk a bit about healthcare now. Not easy to do for people to bring their own personal healthcare stories, concerns to this legislature, but that's how strongly people feel about this. And I want to point out one thing. This was something that was mentioned here, brought forth by my colleagues. In the first 6 weeks of this year, with SHA ambulances alone, there were 216 times that an ambulance was called, but none was available. And we certainly heard stories about that, what impact that has on people. What I want to ask the Premier is how many times since then, and that was February 14th, has it been the case that people in this province have called for an SHA ambulance only to find that there was none available?
Recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do not have the numbers specific to that, but I can speak more broadly to the emergency medical services that are being invested in here in the province. And I maybe speak before I get to that. Maybe I'll start with this, and then I'll go to a little bit of just my personal experience as well, Mr. Chair. For First, there's $3 million that was invested and transferred to our ambulance operators across the province for a fuel subsidy with the inflationary pressures that they were feeling when it comes to the cost of fuel. And about $20 million has been additionally invested in our EMS operations across the province, including on the public, as SHA operates some of their ambulances, but more specific right here to Regina. There's $2.4 million that was provided in addition to their funding. That created 24 and a half full-time equivalents, paramedic positions that are available. It helps to staff 2 additional ambulances in the community of Regina, understanding the pressures that we have, not just in Regina, but across the province. Mr. Chair, 2 additional paramedic response units will join those ambulances. Pardon me. Further, there's an investment of $5.6 million in total since 2020, has added 2 more additional 24-hour-a-day, 7-day staffed ambulances in Regina, and 3 more 24-hour-a-day, 7-day ambulances staffed in Saskatoon. On the private ambulance side, and maybe this is where I would just digress for a moment, is I live in an area of the province where the ambulances are not owned by the SHA, and there are times when, yes, they're busy covering a vast area, and most notably, I would say one of them had a car added to their fleet there, which is entirely helpful. But when you do call for an ambulance in my area, it may not come from Blaine Lake, which is the closest point. It may come from Spearwood, it may come from Big River, it may actually come from Rostern, as they are busy. They are busy servicing all of the people encompassing that area. Understanding that, there was significant investments made in this budget, and this might be one of the reasons why the members opposite might support this budget this particular year. In over 33 full-time equivalent paramedics in 27 different communities have been added to our ambulance fleet. So those communities, Mr. Chair, are Biggar, Carnduff, Cupar, Cutknife, Eston, Fillmore, Hudson Bay, Kamsack, Kinnersley, Lestock, Lloydminster, Melville, Moose Jaw, Nipawin, Norquay, North Battleford, Outlook, Porcupine Plain, Prince Albert, Radville, Shaunavon, Stoughton, Waka, Wawota, Weyburn, Wilkie, and Yorkton. All have received additional FTEs or additional investment due to this budget. In addition to the SHA-owned ambulances, in addition to the private operators that we have that provide an excellent service across the province, including, as I said, the place of the province where I live, including the fixed-wing ambulance service that we have that will service many of our northern communities, we have added in our time in government the STARS Air Ambulance, Mr. Chair. Saskatchewan Air Ambulance and STARS received this last year about $27 million annually to purchase a new helicopter, which is one of 3 new helicopters that they are in the process of purchasing. And I would remind this committee at this point that it was that STARS was brought in, and those of you that were here, STARS was brought into this province over the very loud objections of the members opposite. They did not want the STARS ambulance investment to ultimately occur. STARS ambulance lands between 30 and 40, 45 times in the community where I live and many other communities across this province. In fact, Mr. Chair, just a couple of weeks ago, was my constituency assistant that was on that helicopter, finding her way to the care that she needed in Saskatoon. And a ground ambulance was able to get her out of the back country on where she was, but it was the STARS Air Ambulance that ultimately got her quickly to the very excellent care that she received in Saskatoon and then subsequently in Shelburne, an initiative, again, that was opposed by not these specific members, but by their party, maybe a couple of them, in years gone by. And so, Mr. Chair, the investments in our EMS, we're proud of those investments, not only in our ground ambulance crews, both operated in cities like Regina that are operated by the Saskatchewan Health Authority, but also those private operators that are operating in Waka and Rostern and Spearwood and Big River and Prince Albert, Mr. Chair, of which you know well. As well as our fixed air fleet, Mr. Chair, that does service the northern areas of our province, and I would say service them very, very very competently, getting people to the care that they need, and then ultimately the significant investment that was made by this government, objected to by the opposition in the Stars Air Ambulance Service.
Here, here.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chair, I'm quite confident that the Premier is able to access that information, specifically, again, SHA ambulance. Times since February 14th, when the SHA ambulance was called but no ambulance was available, to the Premier, will he commit to get those figures to us by the end of committee?
Here.
Recognize the Premier.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'd undertake the contact in the Saskatchewan Health Authority. I can't speak for them on whether they would have them to this committee by the end of the day, but we certainly would submit them to this committee as soon as we're able to acquire them.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, one of the problems with the long waits for ambulance, of course, is the state of our emergency rooms. Backlogs, bypass closures. The SHA and this government, they're aware of which emergency rooms are on bypass at any given time in the province. However, people in this province are often not aware. One time this summer, there were 37 different communities that had closures and bypass of their emergency rooms and services, Mr. Chair. I understand why the Premier may not want to post that information. Again, 37 at one time is a shocking number. However, it is a matter of safety for people in this province to know. In fact, people in this province have taken to Facebook or social media to advise their community members, as we do in this province. We take care of each other when we're at our best, to advise which emergency rooms are on bypass, because this government doesn't do that. My question is, they know this information. Why don't they post it on the SHA website so that the people of Saskatchewan can have that valuable information?
I recognize the Premier.
I'm not sure who they is, but I would say this with respect to interruption of any services, whether it be an emergency room service or whatever that service might be. The Saskatchewan Health Authority works first and foremost very diligently alongside and supported by the Ministry of Health and the Government of Saskatchewan in increasing the number of people that are offering services, assisting Saskatchewan people in their health care, to ensure that we don't have those disruptions, or have, at the very least, they're at a minimum. With respect to many rural areas, and I live this and I experience this, Mr. Chair, there are interruptions at times for short periods of time. For example, when we had a snowstorm a few weeks ago, there was a number of interruptions across the province, up to and including close to where I live, because people, quite simply, the people that are employed in those facilities weren't able to get there. And so credit to all of the folks that are employed in those facilities. They made it work, but there was some interruptions across the province at that point. And so for whatever reason, when someone in a smaller rural service, one or two people aren't able to, for whatever reason, find their way to that shift that particular day, we do experience some interruptions, and I would just say a thank you to all of the other folks that ensure that those interruptions are minimal for a minimal period of time, and most certainly are minimal in the services that are being interrupted or disrupted. With respect to the larger centres, and the Minister of Health has said this in this Assembly, is that, and I think he actually quoted the website a few days ago, and if I'm not mistaken, I think he failed to add 3 letters to the end of that website. PDF needed to be added. I think when you add that, you can conveniently find yourself on that website that reports on the situation in Saskatoon. And we're looking at doing the very same here in Regina. And again, I wouldn't say we are looking at that. The SHA is doing that work and leading on ensuring that they're doing the very best that they can to communicate with residents in a service area in the province as to what is happening, what interruption might be there for services. But I would say this as well, and this is not only the goal of the Saskatchewan Health Authority, but most certainly is the goal of the government of Saskatchewan to continue to support the Saskatchewan Health Authority in hiring enough people, whether they be nurses, whether it be LPNs, RNs, nurse practitioners, whether they be physicians, whether they be CCAs, lab and X-ray technologists, whatever that position might be. We are supporting the Saskatchewan Health Authority in their endeavours and their efforts to ultimately hire as many people as we need to offer those services. That is why we have the most ambitious four-point health human resource plan in the nation. We're talking about, and we've discussed, and I won't go through all of the points in here. I could if you'd like, but I won't, Mr. Chair. But the efforts that we are making in recruiting, retaining, ultimately training, and then incentivizing a number of hard-to-recruit positions across the province, and we're starting to show some results in this area. I'd say more broadly. We have over 400 job offers that have been made. I believe that's the most recent number. Over 400 job offers that have been made to folks in the Philippines that would ultimately come here and lend assistance and provide that support to our current frontline healthcare workers. We have a number of Ukrainian newcomers that are working with the Saskatchewan Health Authority. We have 600 applications that this SHA is going through now from healthcare professionals that are international but are living right here in Canada. We have 108 new or enhanced full-time permanent positions that have been filled across Saskatchewan. These are from Saskatchewan or Canadian graduates this past year. As we get to spring and we see a number of additional graduates coming, you will see that number grow. And I would say this, 2022 over 2021, 547 additional RNs and nurse practitioners are practicing in our communities and in our facilities across Saskatchewan. And so we are showing results today, Mr. Chair, in what is a collective challenge across our nation. We do have plans and initiatives in place that are going to ensure that those results continue into the future. We've increased drastically the training positions of all designations. We have incentives in place for hard-to-recruit places, rural, remote, quite often, but not necessarily so across the province. We have some of the highest remuneration practice compensation agreements in Canada for many of the disciplines that we have in healthcare, Mr. Chair, and we're going to continue to utilize folks like where it was here, I believe it was last week now, that are leading the health recruitment agency that we have realigned back into the Ministry of Health is going to be working in supporting communities with their initiatives, taking the provincial initiatives that are there and the guidance from the Saskatchewan Health Authority on the positions that are available in attracting people to work in our healthcare facilities, but more importantly to offer and assist with those healthcare services to Saskatchewan people, a level of service ultimately that they expect. And so the most ambitious health human resource plan in the nation of Canada, I can go through it in much more detail if need be, supported by the recruitment agency, supported by the Saskatchewan Health Authority, ensuring that they are moving to full-time positions in their facilities wherever they can, supported, and all the while support the Saskatchewan Health Authority being supported by this government of Saskatchewan to ensure that we do have the people on the ground that ensure that we're not having delays in our ambulance service, that we're not having delays or disruptions of services in our emergency rooms, whether they be in the most rural areas of this province, the most northern areas of this province, or whether they be in our largest centres like Saskatoon and Regina.
Here, here.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
I'm not sure if that was a no to displaying that information on the SHA website, Mr. Chair, but I won't go back and interject on all of the Premier's answers. I don't know if that's the right word, the remarks that he puts on the record, but I will say this with regard to the information about the little bit of information that's going to be displayed or being displayed about Saskatoon, that does not address what was happening this summer, 37 37 different communities, most of them outside of Saskatoon, and I don't think any of them saw short staffing because of a blizzard, but I'll move on. Mr. Chair, every person, and I think we can agree on this, I certainly hope so, that every person in this province should be able to have access to a family doctor. Not only for their health, of course, but the health of the system. We know right now in this province, 1 out of 6 people don't. 200,000 people in this province do not have access to that critical primary care. The College of Physicians and Surgeons indicate, and I'm going to quote here, Mr. Chair, family physicians are maxed out and cannot take on more work or more patients in the current system. Now, between the administrative tasks, taking on extra patients, 1,000 more patients, leadership roles, paperwork, physicians are reporting feeling burnt out. They're warning of retirements, pending retirements and people leaving the province. Last week, the government did announce some changes to billing. And I think that is something that is welcome and is a good start, and certainly something that my colleague here has been advocating for, as have the physicians and many others in this province for a very long time. But it's not team-based care. That's something that has been called for right across the country, and certainly no exception here at home. When will we see any action on that front? What's the plan on team-based care?
I recognize the Premier.
I got a number of facts and figures here, and I'll try to get through some of them. I mentioned earlier the 4-point health human resource plan we have. That includes some of the work that we're doing in the space of physicians. In fact, it was this government that a number of years ago, over a decade ago, I was a volunteer on our physician recruitment committee in the community where I live. I was a volunteer on the Health Foundation as well, Mr. Chair. But it was at that time that I remember there was a significant change that needed to happen in recruiting physicians into our province, in particular those internationally trained physicians. And not everyone in here will remember the words and the horrors of things like the CAPE exam, but the member from, what is your constituent? The Minister of Government Relations will. The current Minister of Government Relations was the Minister of Health at that point in time. And we brought in the SIPA program. It was at that time as well we made a significant investment in the College of Medicine. 60 seats was the training capacity that we had at the College of Medicine. 60 residency seats is what we had here in the province. That was increased to 100 seats, training seats at the College of Medicine, and 120 resident seats, which was key. And is part of why we have 1,000 more physicians practicing in the province here today than we did at that point in time. In fact, this most recently, we've increased that 120 residency seats to 128, and I think it's this year that we have filled entirely, unlike any other province or even unlike the history of this province, our family medicine seats in that space as well. And so we are having successes here, Mr. Chair. With respect to the 1,000 doctors that have joined our health system, due to those decisions, in part, that occurred so many years ago, changing how we recruit and register international physicians in the province, how we changed the numbers that we were training right here in Saskatchewan. That has resulted in 1,000 additional doctors here today. I think we're just under 3,000 physicians in the 2,800 doctors who call Saskatchewan home. That's 1,000 over where we were 15 years ago. That's an increase of 60%, and it's 450 more family physicians in that 1,000 physician complement. For about 1,400 family physicians in the province, and a number of other specialists has also increased substantially. What I would say with respect to those physicians is, as we move forward, and the question was about team-based care, and I think you're seeing in many communities that team-based care is already, in many cases, underway. There's nurse practitioners that are offering services in many communities across this province. I myself, full disclosure, see a nurse practitioner, Mr. Chair. In this most recent budget, it should be of note, and another reason for all of us in this Assembly to support the budget that was introduced by the Deputy Premier just this past month, was funding and a path, a roadmap for physician assistants to be part of that team in our communities across the province. Again, adding other options for people to offer care in our communities. We see nurse practitioners, physician assistants. We see that team-based care starting to move forward. But I would say that one piece to that is the change in the physician compensation package that was highlighted by both Ministers of Health at the Saskatchewan Medical Association's conference this past week. And I would say that the outgoing president, I believe this is incoming president, pardon me, Dr. Annette Epp, who was incoming president of the SMA, had this to say, and I quote, Mr. Chair, "It's pretty exciting that the government, together with physicians, is working to develop a new model of care that hopefully is going to benefit patients in this province and the doctors as well," end quote. So to answer the Leader of the Opposition's question, we're already moving alongside our healthcare professionals, and not just physicians, but nurse practitioners, now physician assistants, as well as others that deliver healthcare in the province, to delivering that team-based care. And I would say that in many ways we are already doing that, whether that be in our emergency rooms, whether that be in our hospitals, or even whether it be in some of our primary care clinics across the province. And most certainly you're going to see more of that team-based care on a number of fronts when you see the opening of what will be first here in Regina, the Urgent Care Centre. Urgent Care Centre that is looking to be just that. See people that may be urgent but not necessarily emergent, and isn't it necessary that they're in the emergency room, either at the General or the Pasqua in Regina's case, or in Saskatoon at RUH or St. Paul's. And as we are building a similar structure in Saskatoon, just a little bit behind there. That structure is, that urgent care centre is in partnership with the Takakook Cree Nation, another very innovative partnership. But you are going to see those urgent care centres offer very simply something similar, working alongside our healthcare providers as to how we can provide the very best care to those folks that need it in the province. And as an aside, and not really related to the question, but I think equally important to Saskatchewan people, and everyone in this room as well, is the other side of those urgent care centres are going to offer something quite different that isn't about seeing people maybe as quickly as they come through the door, but is going to offer an access point for those that may be struggling through a mental health crisis or have entered, unfortunately, a life of addictions and are looking to make a change in their life. And the other side, the other entry point in those urgent care centres is going to be very much about providing an access point and an access level to healthcare professionals that you may need. For those that maybe don't need that urgent care service but need something more in line with mental health support, or ultimately have made a choice in their life where they're going to move away from living a lifestyle with addictions. That's something I think that has been long needed, not just in our urban centres but across the province. It's not necessarily a pilot per se, but it's going to in many ways help alleviate some of the pressures that we have in our emergency rooms that were alluded to in the question, but also try to offer that access point in some of the care that ultimately so many families need in this province on the topic of mental health and addictions.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
We did get back around to team-based care there eventually, Mr. Chair. And you know, some of that answer sounds plausible and even hopeful, but unfortunately it doesn't meet the definition, the criteria that when you talk to most healthcare providers of team-based care. And I think that's why it's so important, Mr. Chair, that these solutions not only be designed to play well in here or to be taglines or slogans, that those solutions are actually built with those frontline professionals, those actually on the front line in these jobs. After we saw the Regina General Hospital right here in this city, the largest emergency room in this city, on bypass, which is really a horrifying thought, Mr. Chair. When it was on bypass because of short staffing, we heard the Sun President, Tracy Zambori, again repeating calls for a nursing task force. And I think you see this. You see healthcare providers, those on the front lines, those in communities who want to be part of these solutions. But time and time again, we're hearing that they're not being heard by this government. And that was a theme all through the summer and certainly continues today. So my question is this: what does he have to say about Sun's request for a nursing task force? Is he going to say yes?
I recognize the Premier.
I thank you, Mr. Chair, with respect to how we engage with not only the nurses' organizations and the individual nurses that offer those services in community after community, Mr. Chair. There are many representative organizations that both ministers of health engage with repeatedly. As I mentioned earlier, the Sask Medical Association is one of those organizations, alongside many of our labour partners, such as Sun, CUPE, many others, Mr. Chair. Sask Medical Association represents a number of doctors practicing in a number of different capacities. Some are surgeons, specialists, researchers. Some are family physicians offering services. Some are family physicians offering services under salary. Some offering under private delivery services as well, Mr. Chair. Many other healthcare providers, also some private operators. We talked about private ambulance and public ambulance operators here in the province. We have both public and private diagnostic facilities, surgical centres here in the province, and so many folks across the spectrum. But I would say, first and foremost, our focus is always on how we can deliver the very best service to the patient, Mr. Chair. And I think if you go back a number of years ago, one of the very first documents or reviews that the then Minister of Health did was a patient first review, I believe it was called, so many years ago. And I think that some of the outcomes of that review, Mr. Chair, are so very relevant to how we find our way to working with all of our teams across Sun, as well as all of the other representative organizations across what is a very diverse, and I would say getting even more diverse healthcare delivery sector into the future when we start expanding into the areas of mental health and addictions and some of the partners and community-based organizations that we work with and really appreciate to work with in that space. But it's all of those conversations that helped us, for example, come forward with a number of initiatives. Most recently, we were discussing the other day about some of the admitted challenges we have around registered psychiatric nurses, for example. That was a program that was actually cancelled. The training program was cancelled under the members opposite. It was 2009 that we brought that training program back in to the universities here in this province. We've been graduating about 30, I believe, a year, and just recently 30 new Saskatchewan-trained registered psychiatric nurses have been registered each year since that program came back in, and now we've added another 16 seats to that program. There's actually an annual total number of seats now of 80 in that program, a program that had 0 seats under the members opposite. So that's one example of an action taken by this government, by the conversations that we had not only with Sun, but with all of our healthcare partners and organizations and representatives, and our healthcare, the individuals that we talk to when we go out. Quite frankly, we don't go on a healthcare tour or a rural healthcare tour. We go home. Yeah. And we talk to our neighbours that work in our healthcare facilities across the province, and they provide us advice as well. And we take that advice very seriously from the front lines. That's why, and some of that discussion of individuals offering those services, as well as labour organizations, our partners in healthcare, all the representative organizations, helped us shape what is the most ambitious 4-point health human resource plan in the nation. And a plan that is showing results in offering positions and hiring folks from not just this nation or this province, but hiring folks from all around the world. It's part of those discussions that, quite frankly, informed a decision. And again, I said earlier, and I'll reiterate, a very good reason to vote for this budget over the course of the next short while. The incorporation of not just additional nurse practitioners to offer services in our communities, but the incorporation of now physician assistants that are going to help expand the service delivery of health care, adding to the suite of healthcare professionals that can offer that service here in Saskatchewan. So with respect to conversations that we have with Sun or any other of the healthcare representative organizations, individuals, we are going to work alongside them all the while making what we feel are the very best decisions, yes, with their guidance, but the very best decisions in the interest of the patient, because it has always been and will continue to be about offering the very best service to the patients that are walking through the front door of our healthcare facilities in this province.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
It's an awful lot of words, Mr. Chair, to say no to the nurses. And I haven't done this up to this point, Mr. Chair, but I'm going to give the Premier a couple of words of advice, free advice. You can take them if he wants or not.
Listen up.
First of all, let me assure him that nurses in this province have the very best needs of their patients in mind at all times.
Exactly. Hear, hear.
Second piece of advice, and maybe this is a little more unlikely, and I couldn't quite find the link to it, but I know the date, May 15th, 2007. There was a Leader of the Opposition, standing right about here, that gave the then Premier a little bit of advice about listening to those people on the front lines. And in fact, they shouldn't have to take out advertisements and billboards to get your attention, Mr. Chair. It was good advice, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair. So we know that so many of the problems in healthcare in this province right now are because of a lack of staff. They report being burnt out, retiring early, overload, Mr. Speaker, but most of all, what we hear most often and frequently is the lack of respect that these nurses and frontline healthcare providers have felt from this government. We have to do more to retain the workers that we have in this province. It is important to ensure that we have nurses coming from all over the place to practice here, because I do think we have that wonderful story to tell, wonderful communities, Mr. Speaker. But those solutions have to be built with those workers, and we have to retain those that we have. There are a number of ways to do this, but one I think is really important. And we haven't heard any details from that government about this. And it's this. We need to be recruiting First Nations and Métis people to work in our healthcare systems. And I think the member for Kenora-Pelly heard some of these comments last summer outside of the Kamsack Hospital. My question to the Premier is this. What is the plan to ensure that there is a recruitment and retention plan for First Nations and Métis people in this province?
I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would make 3 points on this. I think one would be just a general initiative of the government. 2 would be going into just a touch more detail on a partnership that we are working on with an Indigenous training organization, and then 3 would be, and I don't have the precise numbers, but some of the work that's happening around some of the training seats that are being expanded here over the next short while. So I'll maybe start there with the training. The Minister of Advanced Education is working right now as we speak with SIIT, working with them on the expansion that we did of 550 health training seats, some of those EMT and paramedic seats, as we talked about ambulances earlier, some of those nurses, LPNs and such. A number of those seats are going to be located at SIIT, and the negotiation with respect to just how many seats is currently underway. In addition, the 150 nurse training seats that we had added to bring our healthcare training increase of seats this year to 700. In total, and so those conversations are happening right now between the Minister of Advanced Education, his ministry, and the various post-secondary institutes that can offer that training. Among them, and very well respected, is SIT. So that's number one. Is a number of our training seats will be located at an Indigenous training organization. I would say just secondary to that. When you look not far from where I live in the community of Prince Albert, the University of Saskatchewan has moved their nursing college right downtown Prince Albert. They bought the old forestry building, members opposite built, and then the forestry industry didn't work out for a few years. Thankfully, that investment is back now. They call it the Hall of Eldon Laudermilk, but anyway, I didn't say that. Most certainly, it is being used well and used well now. So I guess in over the broader 20-year investment, I would say thank you for that facility, because we're training young nurses, many of them Indigenous, coming from our provinces north to the community of Prince Albert and taking their nurse training right in the community of Prince Albert in that facility. Second, the Saskatchewan Health Authority is currently finalizing their Indigenous recruitment and retention strategy. Some of the work on the seats, the going to SIIT, and the work on their Indigenous recruitment and retention strategy came from those broader discussions that we talked about in the last question between many of our organized labour groups, discussions with many other of the organizations that represent folks in healthcare, as well as the people that work in healthcare, and in informing and shaping this document that is very close to, I would say, it's coming to fruition. And third, last but not least, is just a general initiative of this government. And whether maybe it's a broader initiative with respect to reconciliation, more general, but I would say an initiative that has all sorts of opportunity to grow off of what is an initial, just essentially a property agreement, and that is the Urgent Care Centre in Saskatoon. We see the Urgent Care Centre being constructed here in Regina. That is a Saskatchewan Health Authority owned and operated building. In Saskatoon, we've taken a little different track. It was through a suggestion that came forward from Chief Larry Ahenekew from Matakakook First Nation that they would like to build a building. Not just to lease the Saskatchewan Health Authority the space so that they can operate a parallel service in Saskatoon of urgent care and some of the access points for mental health and all too often addictions, but to actually add on to that building and the services offered, most notably among them providing training opportunities through quite likely SIIT, so that you could have an internship or a training program that is associated with the Saskatchewan Health Authority run facility like the Urgent Care Centre. I have the mental health and addictions component to that as well. And so where we are today is advancing the training seats. Where we most certainly are going in the very, very short term is to finalize the recruitment, the Indigenous recruitment and retention strategy within the Saskatchewan Health Authority. And I say most excitingly, where we're going in this province of Sky is really the limit on partnering with Indigenous communities on not only the offering of services to all Saskatchewan residents, but partnering with Indigenous communities on the training of not just Indigenous residents, but all Saskatchewan residents moving forward. And so it's an exciting time in this space, Mr. Chair, and I think, again, lends itself to the earlier question on ensuring that we are including all of our healthcare partners, whether they be Indigenous representatives or folks right in the healthcare centres themselves, in the conversations that we're having on how we're going to deliver healthcare, whether that be team-based healthcare or any type of healthcare across the province in the months and years ahead.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chair, training seats, and when I heard the Premier delivering that answer, it's good to hear a plan. We'll check back in and see how those plans work out. The record on that side isn't always the best, but I do know this, that those students going into those training seats, the best way that we can set them up for success to be successful healthcare workers in this province is to ensure that they get the education that they need. In this budget, I think people really were expecting something more than they've gotten from this government over the last decade, and that is declining per-pupil funding. Government sitting on windfall revenues, billion-dollar surplus. People really thought that they might see an investment in our kids' classrooms to set them up for success and to set the province up for success in the future. Vitally important. One of the most crucial investments that we can make in our kids and in our future. But of course, Mr. Chair, they didn't see that. They saw a budget that again, and really inexplicably, fell short, that will force more cuts into our kids' classrooms. We've heard that from Saskatoon Public, we've heard it from Regina Public, we've heard cuts in Southeast Cornerstone, Prairie Valley, Prairie South, and I'm afraid the list goes on and on. A recent memo from Regina Public Schools outlines some of the choices that school boards are facing. Besides cutting staff, which we're seeing school divisions do, Regina Public is looking at examining fees for noon supervision, increasing fees again, downloading onto those parents sending their kids to school because this government didn't fund education. Reducing spending on technology and learning resources and facility projects, the things that we need kids to be learning for the future. Striving to minimize transportation costs, reducing positions at division office that support the delivery of education programs and services. Reducing noon hour staff allocations and reducing instruction positions in schools that will increase, again, student-teacher ratios, Mr. Chair. The question to the Premier is simple. What does he think that Regina Public or other school divisions in this province should cut to make up for the deficit handed to them again this year by that government?
recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll each school division of the 27, Mr. Chair, will make the decisions in the best interest of the folks that they ultimately represent. What I will speak to is the funding levels that the provincial government provided, and maybe a little bit about how we came about to those numbers and where we're going over the course of the next number of months here as well. But as we know in this budget, again, education portion of that budget was $3.1 billion. That's up 6.7% year over year. The portion of that budget going to the school divisions was just over $2 billion, up about 2.5%. That portion of that budget is allocated on the projections that is provided to the Ministry of Education by the school divisions. What we have seen over the course of the last 18 or so months, maybe even a little longer, is that the traditional way of providing those student population projections to the ministry on a once annually basis is not working. Quite frankly, it's just not working. Our province is growing too quickly. We have tremendous economic growth, of which we talked to at the outset of these estimates. We have tremendous population growth. In fact, a higher rate of population growth in this province than we have had in 108 years. And with those people that are moving to the province, they are bringing their children, and they're entering our schools. And so the student population estimates that we received last year from the divisions, quite simply, we just grew quicker than that, likely about double, actually, by the time we found our way through the year. We're seeing those estimates come in again this year. Last year what we did once we realized and were informed by the school divisions as we came forward with interim funding. To the school divisions to ensure that they could offer the educational services and opportunities throughout last year. So this year, what we have already committed to, Mr. Chair, is that we are, and the Minister of Education, I believe, has met with Regina Public this past week, meeting with Saskatoon school divisions next week, has already committed that we will be coming forward with some degree of funding to help address some of the very rapid population growth, unprecedented population growth, and student population growth that we're experiencing in our schools. However, in saying that, with the decisions that many of the boards are facing, and there's no doubt, Mr. Chair, that there are decisions that, and at times difficult decisions that have to be made by multiple school divisions across the province. But there are also opportunities in this year's budget, in addition to the 2.5% increase that went to the school divisions, 6.7% across the more broadly across the education portfolio. For example, the $23 million that is outside of the school division funding that went to the SAS DLC is to fund that DLC. All of the teachers that are working in various school divisions across the province that were offering online services no longer need to offer those online services. That'll be offered by the SAS DLC. So they are now available for classroom instruction, or to be those funds are available to be utilized somewhere else in the division. Now, Regina Public did not report their numbers, but the Saskatoon did, and I suspect Saskatoon Public School Division, it would be similar here in Regina. But they had 49 online teachers that are now available for classroom instruction, about $5 million freed up in resources available for in-class instruction or wherever those decisions need to be made. Now, as I said, Regina Public School Division did not submit. Saskatoon did, but it would likely be something similar in that space. I don't know exactly what the student population differentials might be. So that $23 million that goes into the Saskatchewan DLC, those savings will not entirely, but largely be felt by the school divisions, as they were previously had the expenses of offering that service and no longer will. Those expenses will be incurred by the DLC, which is funded outside of the division transfer by the education budget, which I said it was increased 6.7% this year. And so the Minister of Education is going to continue to meet with school divisions so that we can put some shape to what an interim funding quantum and how that funding can assuredly be focused on the classroom supports, which is where we want that funding to arrive. Whether there's opportunities for, across the divisions, there's about $268 million in reserves that are available across the divisions as well, and whether some of that can be utilized as well potentially, Mr. Chair. So those discussions are happening. They're happening as we speak with the Minister of Education, the board chairs, many of the board members, starting with our larger urban school divisions, where the student population pressures, I think, are most relevant and likely most evident, Mr. Chair. But we're going to continue to, talk about and build on really what is record investment this year in education of $3.1 billion, up 6.7% since last year, and all the while continue to work alongside our school divisions in ensuring that they do have the resources to provide the services in shaping that next generation, our children.
Here, here.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chair, I hardly know where to start with that. Let's start with this. The Premier and I have very different definitions of opportunity. He's talking about the opportunity where all the ways that boards can cut our kids' classrooms, the supports that they need. Mr. Speaker, I think that, Mr. Chair, there's a great deal of opportunity in those classrooms, but it requires us in this building, us as the adults in this province, to make those investments in our kids today, something they haven't done for a decade, Mr. Chair. And I was going to ask the Premier this. He said he'd heard the people that came to the steps of their legislature not that long ago, over 3,500 people. Mr. Chair, they didn't come here to throw that Premier or that Education Minister a parade. They came here to be heard, have their concerns heard. And now, the Premier will like to characterize that this is only a city issue or in some communities. You had people here from Creighton, from Carnduff, from Rose Valley, from Morse, from communities right across this province, Mr. Speaker. But the Minister, the Premier, maybe he doesn't know what they had to say because the Premier didn't have the courage to be out there to listen to them, Mr. Speaker. He found his way to Washington to talk to teachers instead. So, Mr. Speaker, I was there when the Education Minister. I would invite the member from Meadow Lake to quiet down because people in his community want to hear this too. Mr. Speaker, I was there when the Minister of Education spoke might be an interesting word, to the folks at the SSBA this year in Saskatoon. And I want to say this is what they had to say. And again, back to my opening comments, Mr. Chair. This stuff spins in here, and the minister looks so pleased of himself, Mr. Speaker, but it doesn't fly out there, and it certainly didn't fly with the 3,500 people who made their way to this legislature to have their voices heard. But I'll tell you what Jamie Smith-Windsor had to say. The person who's elected to represent the 27 boards, publicly funded boards in this province. She said that the numbers that Premier just used are an irresponsible misrepresentation to frame these dollars announced last year as being part of the increase. Right. The numbers they use, the experts, those who are actually building their budgets right now, the increase to operational funding at a time, a generational cost of living crisis, Mr. Chair, their numbers is 0.7. That's all this government, sitting on windfall revenues, sitting on a surplus, could muster to invest in the kids of this province. And, Mr. Speaker, I don't say this often, but that is absolutely shameful.
Hear, hear.
So I want to say, as I said, this is not just, well, I hear some of the members over there, complaining. Their constituents are concerned about what this government is doing to education as well.
That's right. Absolutely there.
Again, it's not just rural schools, it's not just urban schools, it's schools right across this province. But I'll ask a specific question of rural schools. What can we see? What increase in supports will there be for rural schools that are now looking at cuts because of underfunding by this government?
I recognize the Premier.
I'll help you out there. I'll use just display one example, Mr. Chair, of where not only rural school divisions will find some cost savings, but rural students are going to have access to many more programs than certainly they ever had access to when I attended a rural school, even my children. Today, rural kids are going to have access to more programs than they have ever had access to before in the rural areas of our province, thanks to the Sask DLC. Programs in the way of an agreement signed just the other day with the auto dealers across the province for technician programs, Mr. Chair. The Ag Dealers Association have also signed an agreement. There's a number of film classes that have some animation classes, pardon me, that have some connections very deep into very professional film educators. I think notably in Western Canada, in Vancouver, associated with Pixar and whatnot, Mr. Chair. So the opportunities of, I believe, 180, is it 80 or 180 classes?
180 classes.
180 additional classes that would be available in rural communities. I can share a story of someone I know very well in his later years that wanted to go to university, required a prerequisite of calculus, which was not available in a rural school. Had the DLC been in place, they could have accessed it through there. They ended up doing it through correspondence, which would have been much simpler and a better learning environment through an online school, most certainly. But it was able and access to that course so that you have your prerequisites, no matter where you go to school, because not all of those classes are available in rural communities like they are in some of our larger urban centres. Second to that, the public school divisions. Through the operation and funding of the Sask DLC by the provincial government, 250 teacher positions. I said 50 were in Saskatoon, but many of those are across rural communities as well, rural school divisions as well. Many of those positions now are available to offer services somewhere in some other classroom in that community or somewhere else in the school division itself. And so those are actual resources, human resources, not just money, but more importantly, human resource person, individual that has been hired teaching, who was teaching online for the school division, now will be available to teach in the school division itself, whether that be in a live classroom or where that might be. Through our discussions, I'd also maybe just put forward a couple of things that we aren't going to do, Mr. Chair, and I think this is part of the theme of where we've been over the last number of years, and it's under this government that year in, year out, notwithstanding discussions with unprecedented population growth, of which we did address last year, of which we will address this year with some interim funding, but in general, there's been more for education. There has been more for education across the province. There's been more schools built. There's no denying that. There's been more students in those schools. There's no denying that. There's more teachers in our classrooms. No denying that. There's more EAs in those classrooms as well. There's more funding per student. There's more funding for school divisions. There's more access to childcare across this province, and it's not particularly surprising that the NDP have some questions around and in this area, because it's something they, quite frankly, never had to deal with when they had the opportunity or the honour to be government. It wasn't education under an NDP government wasn't about more schools, more students, more funding. It was about less, much less, starting with less schools. 176 fewer schools because of an NDP government. That 16% decline in student enrollment from the years 1997 to 2007. 10-year period, 16% lower enrollment in our schools. A far cry from the challenges of growth that we're working through with the school divisions today. With 16% less students came 400 less teachers. 400 less teachers in our facilities across this province, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, for the NDP. Most certainly in education, it was always about less. So it only makes sense that we're going to see some day in, day out members opposite grasping to understand how we are managing through this unprecedented student population growth that we're seeing. But I'm quite happy this afternoon to have the opportunity to help them just a little bit. So I want to start with the capital investments. The amount of infrastructure projects that have occurred in this province since 2007, 90 major infrastructure, school infrastructure projects that have been announced. 60 of those are new schools. Mr. Chair, that's almost a new school, just about, for every single member sitting in this House. Every single member in this House, we have built a new school for, every single member of the legislature. And for context, we can do the comparison. When you take 176 schools closed, that's 3 schools closed for every single member sitting in this House under the members opposite. That's the comparison. Three schools closed per member, 1 school built per member. When it comes to preventive maintenance and renewal, never offered under the members opposite when they had the opportunity. This year, $50 million is being provided to school divisions to use how they see fit for preventative maintenance and renewal of the facilities that they have, that thankfully the government changed in 2007, and we quit closing school after school, 3 per person in this assembly. So, Mr. Chair, one likely won't be surprised that under the NDP, the amount of funding provided by the PMR year in, year out was 0, and we saw our schools declining in their student population, declining in investment, ultimately closed them, less teachers, Mr. Speaker, across the province. And the result of that, and here's the contrast, is all the while that was going on, we saw school divisions with the ability to tax. And those school divisions raised those education property tax, due in part to underfunding from the members opposite. And we're quite familiar in this assembly as well as what the result of that environment was. School divisions increased the education property tax. They had underfunding from the then NDP government to the level that there was protests across this province, protests up to and including in the very hallways of this legislature. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, thankfully today, education is very much about more. It's about more funding and more to come in term this year. It's about more schools. It's about more students. It's about more teachers. It's about more educational assistants. And most certainly, when you look at what's happening in the broader economy across Saskatchewan, it's going to be about more opportunity for each and every one of those students that's graduating.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
I don't know if I promised that I wouldn't give the Premier any more advice, but I'm going to give him one more piece of advice. And actually, it's not from me. And we'll see if folks can guess who this advice is from, Mr. Chair. This is the quote. They have to come up with something other. That's an old talking point, and quite honestly, I'm a bit tired of it, Mr. Chair. Not my words, but I think wise words. That is, of course, former Cabinet Minister Nancy Hepner, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, no, I understand why the Premier doesn't want to talk about his own record, certainly not about this budget, not even the last 5 years. You know, he doesn't even want to talk about the record of his government, because the record of his government is 10 years. 10 years of reduced funding for the education system, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. But you know, there was a time in this province when we did value those schools. You know, if you go to any rural community right now, you know, you look at any rural community, and I think a lot of different municipalities do this, Mr. Speaker. One of the first things that people did when they came here was to set up a school for their kids, something that we valued, that investment, Mr. Speaker, something that seems to be lost on those members opposite. And you know, something else that has a long history in this province is the fact that we have people who are incredible stewards of this land that we are all lucky enough to live on. And that goes back generations, thousands of years in this province. And we've seen our producers be incredible stewards of that land. They sequester carbon, Mr. Chair, zero-till practices, you know, something that I'm not sure any particular government can take credit for. We have producers that, you know, they're innovative. They know how to make a dollar stretch if anyone's, you know, grew up in the farm, certainly with someone who lived through the 30s in this province. You know, they sequester carbon in the soil. Our livestock producers being the last line of defense through pastures when it comes to preserving prairie native grasses. And Mr. Chair, that work in the ag sector that they do to sequester, to mitigate emissions is important. But right now, under this government, there's no recognition and no incentive under this government. I want to ask, why is that the case? And when will we see a plan from this government that recognizes the important role that producers do in this province to sequester carbon?
I recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Chair. Good question. This is a good question with respect to recognizing. Really, what we're talking about is recognizing from a monetary perspective, a financial perspective, the investments that have already been made by Saskatchewan agricultural producers, and it most certainly is an initiative that we have been working on. In order to recognize that investment, that innovation, that technology that is being used in our farms across this province to really combat what is an unnecessary and really a policy that is not helpful in any way in food production or energy security across North America that's been brought forward by a federal Liberal administration, which is supported by Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. And so, Mr. Chair, Mr. Deputy Chair, where we start with this from a provincial perspective, and maybe what we'll do first is identify the problem. First, the problem are those two federal leaders. But the policies that those two federal leaders are supporting, the increasing carbon tax that we see that was promised never to go above $50. Well, actually, first of all, if you go back, it was promised to have a discussion with the provinces before we ever move forward with it. They moved forward with it, promised it'd never go over $50, but with Jagmeet's support, $65 it is today, on its way to $175 and likely $243. Right. Mr. Chair, that is what we are dealing with from the federal perspective, is shifting sands, a shifting policy network, whether it be on a carbon taxation front, now suggesting that we should also reduce our fertilizer use by some 30%. Yeah. Hey, what are they talking about, Mr. Chair? Honestly, talk about not having a clue. Not having a clue with respect to not only how we are producing food, providing food security for Canadians, for North Americans, and for over 150 countries around the world. This 1.2 million was a million, now it's 1.2 million and growing person province is doing just that. And we aren't doing it, Mr. Chair, by reducing the fertilizer use. What we are doing is ensuring that the fertilizer that we are using is most certainly being placed in the right place, at the right time, and the right amount, Mr. Chair, and it's the right product, which is the 4 Rs, which is the National Stewardship Program, which many agricultural producers in this province are following. So we're not going to reduce our fertilizer use, sacrificing our food security in this nation, this continent, and ultimately for the 150 countries that we export to around the world. We would and will continue to advocate to get rid of the costly carbon tax, again promised to go to 50 with Jagmeet's support and the NDP's support, up to 173 and likely 243 at some 176 and 243. Is it 176 schools or 176 carbon? I can't remember all these numbers, Mr. Chair. But you add to that now federal policy that's coming around the regulations with the Clean Electricity Standard. And if you don't think our ag producers are large users of electricity and are not supportive of a doubling and a tripling and a quadrupling of our electrical rates in this province because of some ill-thought-out policy brought down from above by Jagmeet and Justin on Saskatchewan agricultural farmers, adding to their bottom line cost of doing business, Mr. Chair, well, sadly, you would be mistaken. So we don't support any of those policies, but we will do, as the question asks, do what we can to mitigate the impact of those policies on our farmers who are producing some of the most sustainable food that you can find on earth. Last year's budget had $2 million available in that budget, went to the Global Institute for Food Security to do just that, to identify and to recognize and to quantify what is actually happening in our Saskatchewan farms when it comes to carbon sequestration and what they have found on a per ton basis. So for every ton of canola that we produce in this province, we do so emitting 64% less carbon emissions than our competitors, the next 7 largest competitors around the world. Wheat, 65% lower carbon emissions per ton in Saskatchewan than the next 7 largest competitors around the world. Field peas, 92% lower carbon emissions on a per ton basis than our competitors around the world. And what we tell folks when we're around the world talking to them about canola, Saskatchewan canola oil, Saskatchewan wheat, Saskatchewan peas, that our environmental story, our sustainable story, when you purchase our products, which are of the highest quality, competitively priced, and the most sustainable on earth, now becomes your story. And that is precisely why so many people are lined up to do just that, to purchase our agri-food products, but also to purchase our energy products, of which the narrative is the same, which is why we have shifted in how we communicate to the world what we are doing here in this province. That's why we have created the Secretariat for Sustainable Growth in the Premier's office that is working with our international partners, working with all of the ministries, working with the industries in Saskatchewan, working with our research institutes to ensure that we're communicating to other levels of government that they need to get it through their thick heads that their policies just aren't productive, aren't going to work in the province of Saskatchewan, and at times we're going to use the tools that we have to buck those policies on behalf of the people that we represent. Mr. Chair. But also to work with our research institutes and our farmers. And there are some pilot projects going on across this province on how we can actually find our way to a monetary credit with no help, zero help from the federal Liberal administration, and even less from Jagmeet Singh and his NDP band of compatriots there, Mr. Speaker, comrades, whatever you want to call them, Mr. Speaker. No help from them on how we can monetize and recognize the investment that has been made in Saskatchewan agriculture, like zero-till, like precision ag, Mr. Speaker. Right. All of these things that have been innovated and really have started right here in our province. Zero-till drills are manufactured in Saskatchewan. They were innovated in Saskatchewan. They're sequestering carbon here as well as throughout the prairie Midwest in U.S., Mr. Speaker, in Ukraine, in Australia, as well as many other parts of the world. Mr. Speaker, we have a great story to tell in this province. Nowhere is that story stronger than in the industry of agriculture, where we produce the highest quality. We produce a cost competitive, but we also produce the most sustainable food that you can buy on earth, and it should be recognized by a federal government that has brought in wrong-headed policy that is doing nothing but costing our Saskatchewan producers money. And we'd ask the members opposite to support us in removing those policies on our Saskatchewan.
I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Chair, it's clear that the producers in this province have done their part, as they always have. And it's clear, I guess, from that answer that the Premier is going to continue to bellow and bellow, but not actually achieve any results. Mr. Speaker, if he wants to talk about the federal leaders, I'm happy to clear the air. Very happy. So anytime, if I have the privilege of being Premier of this province, it will be the case that I have no problem telling any federal leader, whether it's Justin Trudeau or Jagmeet Singh or any other Prime Minister, Mr. Chair, I have no problem telling them when they are offside with the interests of the people of Saskatchewan, like they are with the carbon tax. And further, Mr. Chair, I have no problem speaking up to their federal leader, Pierre Poilievre, when he's dead wrong with his plans to cut the child care program. And further this, if I'm allowed a little bit of looking in the rear view, Mr. Chair, I never would have rolled over for Stephen Harper and cost the people of this province hundreds of millions of dollars on equalization, and I certainly wouldn't have then gone on to put him on the payroll, Mr. Speaker. But anyway, moving on, I've heard tale about this Premier slapshot, but Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, he is a world-class puck dragger. So I'm going to move on to the next piece. And I want to ask a question, because this was a question that was on the minds of everyone at SUMA. 90% of those delegates there called on this government to do something about their broken plans with the CIS program. Their changes, Mr. Speaker, that have caused downloading of responsibility to municipalities across this province have increased suffering, have increased homelessness in communities large and small. You don't have to go through many communities in this province before you see the evidence of just how failed this government is when it comes to supports for our most vulnerable. My question to the Premier, will he follow through on what SUMA is calling for and scrap his failed plans and get back to the drawing board?
recognize the Premier.
At the end of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll walk through again a few quotes and a number of initiatives. But if we just back up a number of years, the previous programs that we had, the ASSIST program, were, I believe, SAP and T, and we had a number of conversations around those programs with some of the and with a number of stakeholders. In fact, we brought a committee together to look at how could we improve those programs, maybe bring them together into one more simple program. And so that was the SAP and T program. For example, what we heard, and we heard about it in this House, was those programs that we had at that point in time would start to claw back. Yeah, I guess they were. They were brought in under the new Democrat government, the NDP government, but they would, if someone started to have employment income, they would start to claw back those benefits immediately. And so there was questions, and rightfully so, around could there be a buffer so that folks could, have some income exemption so that they could start earning some income without experiencing a dollar-for-dollar clawback right out of the gate. And so those were some of the discussions that the then Minister at the time brought together a committee to look at improving the income assistance program that we have in this province. And former leader Ryan Miley actually sat on that committee, came forward with a number of the recommendations that went into the SIS program. In that program, it had some of those income exemptions that we had discussed. The last couple of budgets, this program has been increased about $145. It's one of the highest income support programs in the nation of Canada. And one of the questions that we had heard, and the minister is reaching out and attempting to answer this question to all that may have asked it at the SUMA convention, was around direct pay for rental to the landowners. And there's two minds on that, Mr. Chair. Many think that you need to have the option to not have that direct pay, because these folks are good budgeters and learn to be even better budgeters, and then have opportunities to earn income without that dollar-for-dollar clawback. And so there's some that think it should be the way it is, but there should be some mechanism in place for those that may need that direct pay model. And there is a trustee that can be appointed that will ultimately manage that direct pay for things such as rent. In fact, this most recent budget, this year's budget, the last 2 years' budget, increased the number of trustees to work with those folks that may want to utilize that direct pay model. I believe under the previous two programs, it was about 70% of the folks did not use the direct pay model, and we have trustees in place to support those that may want to use the direct pay model under the current system that came about through recommendations by a committee that was consulted with, that the former leader of the opposition sat on. On the direct pay model, I have a quote here from a fellow by the name a fellow with the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry is Peter Gilmore, and he says, Mr. Chair, I quote, "Many of the people that we work with are among the best budgeters that I know. They're better budgeters than I am, so I don't want to take that away from anybody." And so that's in reference to the option for not having direct pay for budgeting your way through. Mr. Chair, this is a program among a suite of programs that received increases this past year, about a 6% increase this past year. I also want to take the opportunity to address a couple of the comments that were in the preamble as well, with respect to the Leader of the Opposition ever standing up for the people of Saskatchewan and explaining quite clearly, not in a crystal cloudy way, but in a crystal clear way, the position of the NDP. And I guess I would have a question of my own is how would you ever stand up to Justin or Jagmeet and articulate what your position is when you can't even articulate it to the members of your caucus? Quite frankly, what we have seen over the course of the last while is the members of the NDP caucus coming off on different policy positions than what is coming across here, the question period floor. For example, the NRTA, we hear they support the NRTA, then we see the member from Saskatoon Centre saying that that document is actually illegal, and the fact and the ability, the constitutionally protected ability of provinces to develop their natural resources is illegal, according to the NDP member from Saskatoon Centre. And he say we don't support the carbon tax, but the member for Nutana has said a price on pollution is a necessary one. Yep. We support legal firearms owners in Saskatchewan is what we hear from across the way. But then again, the member for Nutana says the Saskatchewan Firearms Act continues to seed strife and division and promotes fear, Mr. Chair. We support pipelines. We heard a little bit about this over the course of the last week. The member for Elphinstone Centre opposed to the Trans Mountain XL pipeline, and the NDP voted against the KXL and Northern Gateway in this very House. Never mind the tweets about what goes in those pipelines by that member. We won't decriminalize hard drugs. Then the member for Nutana. You will see merits on why it's necessary to legalize the toxic drug supply. Right, Mr. Chair. We don't support the equalization formula. Member from Nutana goes on to say the formula was fair. She went on to criticize the province for signing on to the equalization program decades ago, only to turn around and claim that now it is unfair to Western Canada. Mr. Chair, we support small business. The member's opposite claim. The member for Elphinstone Centre, she shared a petition to support Justin Trudeau's tax increases on small business. Right. Mr. Chair, we need to investigate Toronto-based grocery chains. As a long policy position of the NDP through and through as to the need to investigate Toronto-based grocery chains. We've seen the federal members of the NDP push very ambitiously on this, when, as a matter of fact, the NDP accepts donations from Galen Weston-owned businesses. Mr. Chair, it is nothing you can imagine. We support retaining our graduates, and again, just the other night, we saw the member for Saskatoon University say that they would do away with the graduate retention program, the greatest and largest tax increase that young career professionals are receiving here in this province. So, Mr. Chair, I would ask the member of the opposition, the leader of the opposition, to, if she wants to practice standing up to Justin and Jagmeet, she should start with her own caucus members.
Here.
I recognize the leader of the opposition.
Again, Mr. Chair, that was a lot of words to say no to SUMA. That's right. And a lot of nerve, actually, coming from that Premier when he can't even get it straight with his seatmate about their position on PSG. But I digress, Mr. Speaker. You know, he's got quite a list there. I have a list of my own, Mr. Chair. First of all, I was corrected. The member from Indian Head Milestone is probably right. My dad would be embarrassed that I said dragging the puck, which up until today I thought was dragging the puck. It's ragging the puck. So I apologize, Mr. Chair. I've got a baseball quote that hopefully I get to use at some point today. But I do have a list, and the Premier went through a list. You know, it's spin, it's a bunch of things. You know, I've got a list about positions of members opposite. We could talk about the GTH, we could talk about abortion, we could talk about the notwithstanding clause, a whole bunch of things. But you know what? I want to focus on the needs of the people of this province and the things that they want us to be talking about. So here's a list for that Premier about his record. Not spin, not cute lines in this legislature, but the things that bloody well matter to the people of this province, Mr. Chair. So again, here we have the lowest rate under this Premier, the lowest rate of job growth under his watch, the second lowest economic growth rate, the highest rate of mortgages in arrears, second highest rate of child poverty, the worst 5-year retention of immigrants outside of Atlantic Canada, and over 35,000 people lost from this province through net out-migration. That's his record, Mr. Chair, and that is something that is impacting people right across this province right now. Well, the member from Meadow Lake has got his tell going on over there, but here's another one, and he should listen up, because this impacts his community too. And we have this. Oh, it's a laughing matter, Mr. Speaker. That is the rate of suicides in this province, year over year. You know what? These members told us, hey, we've got this, you know, all of the things that the member for Cumberland brought forward to this House, Tristan DeRocher, walking half the length of the province to be here to draw attention to suicides in this province, Mr. Speaker. Last year, they were up again under this government. That is their record. But there's so many things I want to talk about here, but this one, I'm running out of time again with the ragging the puck. This is one I want to talk about, and it's about addictions in this province. If folks saw the article that was in the CBC about the faces of overdose deaths in this province in the last 3 years. People from communities large and small, people that are represented by members on both sides of this assembly. People with hopes and dreams and families. What's the record under this government? Well, this year again, we're on track for another year of record overdose deaths. 186 so far this year. That means every 3 days, every 2 days in this province, we lose 3 people to overdose deaths. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, this is not a partisan issue. This is not one to be injecting one's ideology. This is one to get very serious about and lean into the solutions that we know work. This government, sitting on windfall revenue, refused to do what was right, what's evidence-based, something that would have cost lives. And that is fund safe consumption sites. Well, they're groaning over there, Mr. Chair. This is incredibly serious. Again, 186 deaths this year alone. When will this Premier and this government step up to the plate, do what's right, do what saves lives, and fund those safe consumption sites?
Recognize the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a challenge: mental health, addictions, suicide, opioid overdoses, bad drugs, essentially on our streets, Mr. Chair, are a challenge, not just in Saskatchewan, but across the nation. With respect to funding safe injection site here in Saskatchewan, that's not a consideration that the government is considering at this time. We take advice from many with respect to where we invest the dollars that we do in both mental health and addiction services, and are choosing to focus those investments due to many conversations that we have on rehabilitation and access to those rehabilitation beds. Mr. Chair, we do invest some dollars in harm reduction as well across the province with various organizations, but very much are focused on funding not only the 150 rehabilitation beds that we've committed to, but quite likely having to go beyond that. Here's one individual that has made some public comments with respect to safe injection sites. It's Tribal Chief Mark Arcan, and he says, and I quote, "I don't support organizations that help our people take drugs. We would never let our people into our houses and do drugs in front of us, whether it's safe or not. The goal is to get people off of drugs and alcohol." And we agree with that to the level that the province can be involved, and that's why this budget is bringing in another $12.5 million, $12.4 million in targeted initiatives, bringing up the number of rehabilitation beds that we have in the province, and finding our way to those 150 rehabilitation beds. Those add to 475 pretreatment beds that we have, detoxification and post-treatment beds that we have in the province as well. Mr. Chair, it also involves a provincial drug task force. It involves some of the investment I discussed earlier in the urgent care centres as some of the access points for not only folks that may have entered a life of addictions and want to make a change, but folks that may be having a mental health crisis as well, and really creating that access point for Saskatchewan residents. I would say that's the first track when it comes to addressing mental health and addictions and some of the support that needs to be in place for folks to find their way to a treatment program. The second is to remove the drugs from our streets. That is why you are seeing unprecedented investment in our RCMP and our municipal police forces, Mr. Chair. That's why you saw in this budget, starting with the speech from the throne last year, a commitment and the subsequent investment, actually an MOU on the first initiative with the Minister of Policing and Corrections, with Grand Chief Hardlot from PAGC, on community Indigenous policing initiatives, Mr. Chair. That is eyes and ears in communities, to remove some of these products from those communities. The second part of that speech from the throne and ultimately funding in this budget was to create the Saskatchewan Marshal Services, which will be there to support our RCMP that are operating in many of our rural communities across the province, or in our larger urban centres, our municipal police forces, in an effort to remove the drugs from our streets and remove the people that are bringing those drugs to our streets, Mr. Chair. And so we have a dual-track approach when it comes to, what are we going to do with respect to what is a Canadian and national challenge, a continental challenge, but Canadian challenge for sure, in access to terribly toxic drugs. Those drugs are being accessed by our family members, Mr. Chair, and so we're going to provide the supports for those folks to find their way to a rehabilitation program, but we're also going to fund and support our law enforcement officials in enforcing the laws to remove this poison, to remove these toxic substances from the streets in our communities. Hear, hear.
In order for us to complete at the agreed upon time of 6 o'clock in those hours, and still allow time for closing comments from both sides of the House, this will be the last question and the last answer. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard to that answer, this isn't an either-or scenario. Of course, we agree that we need to take these dangerous drugs off the streets, that those who are peddling poison to our children in this province need to be dealt with strongly. And it's not or, it's not but, it's and. We need to do everything we can to ensure that in the next 3 days and the 3 days after that, we don't continue to lose people at the rate that we're losing them in this province right now. Mr. Chair, of course, I'm a mom. Many of us in this place are parents or aunties, grandparents even. None of us want our children, anyone in our community, to start using these drugs. But they do. And once, if it does happen, we want to hope, we all hope, that they get off those drugs as soon as possible. Of course we do. But you know what? In order for folks to get the help they need, to wait out that gap, that very difficult gap between detox and treatment, because the wait lists here again are very long, they have to be alive. And that's what we hear from parents. That's what we hear from people who are facing this scourge in their communities. So the fact that you would look one of the pieces of this solution in the eye and say, no, that's not for us. That's not good enough, Mr. Chair. But my last question is this. This tired and out-of-touch government, again, failing to deliver on the cost of living. We see that for families, we see that for seniors. You know, there might be some hope ahead of the budget in an election year, we've heard from the finance minister, but not in this one, not the one that she put together this year when people are struggling. And certainly not for those in our universities who are facing, at this time, in addition to the lowest minimum wage in the country, in addition to all of the other costs, a 4% increase to tuition. Mr. Chair, we are losing young people out of this province at an alarming rate. This is one of the reasons they tell us that they are choosing to go elsewhere. Why did that Premier fail to deliver any relief at all in this budget for those who are facing 4% increase to tuition this year?
I recognize the Premier.
Thank you. I was just discussing with the Minister of Advanced Education, of which I knew, Mr. Chair, we're, with our post-secondary institutes, and by their request, we entered into a 4-year funding agreement to provide certainty for the University of Saskatchewan, University of Regina. We're in the 3rd year of that funding agreement that was front-loaded, Mr. Chair, so they could manage their way through some of the decisions that they felt they had to make. And so that was a negotiation that was requested by those post-secondary institutes. We were happy to work with them on that, front-loaded the funding model, and are currently in a discussion about how we would replace that 4-year funding agreement with a multi-year funding agreement for years into the future, as it provides, as I said, that certainty for the students as well as the institutions itself. Mr. Chair, what I would say as well is when it comes to young folks, whether they be in our post-secondary institutes, coming out of our K-12 system, entering the workforce, or those young career folks that are starting a family in this province, the conversation, and it comes up in this House virtually every day, the first couple of questions around affordability, inflationary pressures, and how we are addressing that in Saskatchewan. And I'd like to take the opportunity to address a few points on affordability more generally that impact that same young person, young family, young career professional, but impact us all as well across the province. And I've used this statement, but I'll get into a little more depth on it here in question period. I've mentioned it, and some information provided to me from the Minister of Finance, and it's a comparison. It's a comparison of a young family of 4 that may have a household income of $75,000. Years ago, under the NDP, that family would have paid about $5,000 in taxes. Today, under the Saskatchewan Party administration, the government here, they pay just a little less than $2,000. How could that happen, you might ask? And I'll tell you that we, as a government, raised the personal exemption on their income tax. We raised as well their spousal exemption on their income tax. We raised their child exemption on their income tax, and then we lowered the income tax rate overall from where it was, and then every year we index that income tax to the tax brackets, Mr. Chair. So what does that all mean? Well, it means that that family that was paying $5,000 under the NDP, now paying less than $2,000 today, saving $3,000 for that family, not just this year, not just next year, but every single year, Mr. Chair. So they're going to... That $3,000 makes life more affordable for that family of 4. This young couple, the same family of 4, they know how important it is to have their children in activities, in sports, in arts,
and in cultural activities. And that means that they will receive another $300 a year, $150 per child, $200 if one of those children has a disability, through the active families benefit, which is being emulated today by the Alberta NDP, quite frankly. They've seen the advantage in supporting young families. How much were they getting to help with the costs of their kids' activities under the Saskatchewan NDP years ago? Zero. Zero, Mr. Chair. Zero, because the active families benefit just simply didn't exist here in the province. It was a campaign promise that was made by this government, by this party, Mr. Chair, by the Saskatchewan party, and it was a campaign promise that was kept. So that's $3,000 a year in savings each and every year, $300 a year in savings due to the active families benefit, but there's more. There's more that this family would experience today. Do you know how much they would get for individualized service? Let's say one of their children might be living with autism, Mr. Chair. It was under the NDP, zero, big zero. There was no individualized funding under the NDP for any child that may be living with autism, Mr. Chair. This was another campaign promise that was made by the Saskatchewan party, and it's a promise that was kept. It's for individualized funding, $8,000 a year for children up to the age of 5, $6,000 a year for those children aged 6 to 11. So that's $3,000 a year in income tax savings, $300 a year in the active families benefit, and $6,000 to $8,000 a year if one of those kids happens to be on the autism spectrum. But there's even more than that for this family of 4 in Saskatchewan today. Maybe one of the parents or one of the kids might have diabetes. We now cover the cost of an insulin pump in Saskatchewan. That's up to $6,300 every 5 years. We also cover the cost of the flash glucose monitors for kids under the age of 18. Again, neither of those programs existed under the members opposite when they were paying that high income tax rate. But today, thankfully, families do receive that support. So $3,000 in income tax savings, $300 on with the active families benefit, $6,000 to $8,000 if one of those children is on the autism spectrum, and additional dollars if one in that family has diabetes. Still more for that family. What if one of those children is in daycare? We are now bringing in $10 daycare here in the province. That's going to save a family hundreds and hundreds of dollars in each and every year. Maybe that couple has a couple of elderly parents that are living with a low income and they might not be able to help them out. Well, that elderly parent qualifies for the seniors income plan. Now, that's one program that, full credit, it did exist under the NDP. It did exist under the NDP. It paid $90 each and every month, loyally, but it never increased one dime in 16 years under their government. Once our government took office, the seniors income plan doubled, then it tripled, and now it is actually quadrupled. Now it's up to $360 a month. That's up $270 a month under the members opposite. Maybe that same family is thinking of buying their first house. Well, they are now going to qualify for just over $1,000 under the first-time home buyers tax credit. Again, a promise made by this party, a promise kept by this party when they formed government. Maybe one or both of those parents recently completed their own post-secondary education. This is a significant difference given the comments this past week. $20,000 tax incentive in tax credits that would be carried forward by those folks as they stay in the province, work in the province. That is the best youth retention program in Canada. It's the graduate retention program, and it's one that the member from Saskatoon University said they would cancel. Mr. Chair, that again was another promise made by this party and a promise kept by this government. So, very few of those programs existed under the NDP. They were enhanced under this government. That is the $1,050 to help that family buy their first home, $3,000 to help with the cost of tuition each and every year, $20,000 to stay and work and raise their family here with the graduate retention program, $3,000 in income tax savings each and every year, $300 for the active family activities each and every year. Seniors income plan increases for their parents, $6,000 to $8,000 a year if one of those children happens to be on the autism spectrum. Thousands more saved in the support for insulin pumps. And last fall,
that same family would have received $1,000 in affordability tax credits. $1,000 in affordability tax credit. Mr. Chair, that is thousands of dollars in savings and supports that have come from this Saskatchewan Party government to address more recently affordability concerns, but over the long term, the cost of living in this province, from eight different programs and tax credits that didn't, for the most part, even exist under the members opposite. So one program I would say that did exist under the members opposite, but it provided just 1/4 of what it did today, was that seniors income plan. So, Mr. Speaker, this family today, this family of 4 today, is thousands of dollars, literally thousands and thousands of dollars in better shape than they ever were under the NDP or ever would be should the NDP ever become government again. So most importantly, what we will do on this side of the House is continue to stand up for these very families, this family of 4 and many more like them across this province, to ensure that our community, the community that they live in, is affordable, and to ensure that they have every opportunity to stay here as well as their children in the next generation.
Before I ask the Leader of the Opposition and the Premier for brief closing comments, I would ask officials to make their way off the floor, please. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the time and the opportunity here today. I want to say thank you not only to you, but the clerks, the pages, folks in Hansard, Sergeant-at-Arms, Ledge Security, the folks in broadcast services, all of the people that work in front of the scenes but also behind the scenes here, to allow us this opportunity to ask questions of the Premier about something as very important and crucial to the people of this province as the choices made in the budget. I want to say thank you also to my team, first of all, behind the scenes. Those, I assume they're watching back in the caucus office. Small but mighty team, Mr. Chair, who have a lot of weight on their shoulders, you know, a lot riding on, you know, a very small opposition, but they do an amazing job. And I don't probably tell them often enough because you're kept rather busy in a 12-member opposition, but you know, they are working day and night so hard for the people of this province, and we see that. And I think the people of the province appreciate that as well. And I want to say thank you to this team, those who are here today, those who are watching back at home. I say this a lot, but I mean it every time. You know, I'm not sure I would pick 12 as the number I'd want for opposition. You would probably want to have a few more and be on the other side. But if I had to pick 12, or 11, I guess, I'd pick this crew all over again, every time. These are people who care about the people of this province. They're informed, they're smart, they're funny, and they're going to make great cabinet ministers someday, Mr. Chair, and I can't wait to see that. And I do want to thank the Premier for the debate today, for the answers. You know, this is important, and most of the time we can have a good joke back and forth, and I know, you know, it's It sometimes gets heated on the floor of this Assembly, but it should. The things that we discuss here are important. The things that we bring forward, we don't do for ourselves, as none of us should. We do for the people that we represent. And there should be a good airing of differences of opinions. So I thank him for being present today with his officials and for the exchange that we had here. This team is focused on the things that matter to the people of this province: healthcare, education, the cost of living. And I know today the Premier talked about an imaginary family of 4, which works okay in here. But out there, you know, the question I've been asking people is, are you better off than you were last year? Are you better off than you were 5 years ago? And time again, Mr. Chair, the answer comes back, no. And that's what keeps us up at night. That's what keeps us working hard and bringing these concerns, these questions, but also those hopes and dreams that we hear from the people of this province forward. Because people want to be part of that brighter future here in this province. That's what this is all about. And with due respect to the Premier, I'm not one who honestly likes to call names, but the description of old and tired and out of touch is what comes back to us time and time again in this province. And I think that it is time, you know, sometimes governments get a little long in the tooth. I think it's time that the people of this province had a government who was working and connected to their needs and their concerns, Mr. Speaker, and that's what this team will continue to work towards. We're going to keep working hard and listening, keep earning the trust of the people of this province. Mr. Chair, and I make this pledge. We will never, never take that trust that the people of this province have placed in us for granted. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
I recognize the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Leader of the Opposition for her comments. The tired old, I have a very offended colleague here that is looking for an apology at some point. He's taking it very personal, Mr. Chair, kind of like our Boston Bruins fans here. But I do want to take an opportunity to just say a couple things. First and foremost, to all the building staff in this building. We couldn't conduct the business that we do each and every day without all of the building staff that come in here each and every day, make sure that we can do the business that we do. So thank you to them. Thank you to the officials that attended here today, officials that are working behind the scenes, all of the staff that we see in the galleries here, the ones that are back in their offices. Thank you for what you do each and every day as well. And part of, whether you're government or opposition, you're part of making this province a better place. And when we look at some of what our province is achieving yet today, I think you can hold your head high and be very proud that you are part of building a much better province of Saskatchewan than we even had yesterday. So thank you for your effort. Mr. Chair, I want to take the opportunity as well to thank you for not only chairing this meeting, but chairing many of our exchanges back and forth. And thank you for the work that you do as an MLA in a neighbouring constituency to myself. Thank you to the opposition members as well. The opposition, as much as we may seem like we disagree day in, day out, in particular on NHL hockey teams, but as much as we may appear to disagree, Mr. Chair, everyone that serves in this House is here for the right reasons. I truly believe that. And opposition has a very important role to play in a democracy. And I would say that the opposition that we have here today plays that role, and they as well can hold their heads high for a number of reasons. They are a strong opposition, and one that we face every day, and they do hold this government to account. And I would say thank you and to the Leader of the Opposition. Being a leader of any political organization, any political party, whether you sit in the opposition side or the government side, it brings with it a certain different level of challenges, and I would say a certain level of enjoyable moments as well. and remember the enjoyable moments and hopefully work through the challenges quicker than they arise. But thank you to the Leader of the Opposition as well for what she does each and every day in this House and outside of it. Thank you to my colleagues, all the government colleagues, MLAs on the government side of the House. The Leader of the Opposition thinks she has a great team. If she just served an hour here, she'd know what a great team really looks like. And I say that in jest, Mr. Chair. And I'm very honored to serve with you day in, day out, whether it be in this House or more broadly across the province of Saskatchewan, and through you, I would say, as we find our way to the end of this session, please thank your families on behalf of myself personally and on behalf of your other colleagues. As we said today, nobody serves in this Assembly without the love and support of their family, and please, when you do go home, please thank them and make sure that you're able to take some time and spend that with your respective family. And last but not least, I'd just say thank you to more broadly to the people across the province of Saskatchewan, of which there are more each and every day. The recipe for success in this province, it really isn't that complicated. In what we do in providing energy security and food security to the rest of the world, we attract investment. Mr. Chair, we attract that investment into this province. That creates jobs. It creates opportunities for people to move here. We're seeing all of that happen now. But I would say more important than all of that, and what drives me each and every day, and I'll never lose sight of, is ensuring that opportunity is going to be there for that next generation, for my children and ultimately my grandchildren. And just trying to do the little bit that we can as a government in leaving this place a little bit better than we found it. Whether that be in growing the economy, growing the opportunity, or the subsequent services that growth can provide. The line that growth that works for everyone doesn't work without the aforementioned growth, and that is what I would like to say thank you to more broadly to all of the people across the province, as they most certainly are creating the environment for some tremendous growth for today and for years into the future, and we are going to ensure that we work alongside them to ensure that growth truly does work for everyone across what I think is not only the greatest province in Canada, but the greatest place to live on earth. Thank you very much.
We'll do the vote off. Is subvote EX01, Central Management and Services, in the amount of $6,998,000 agreed? Carried. Is subvote EX03, Communications Office, in the amount of $1,094,000 agreed? Carried. Is subvote EX04, Cabinet Planning, in the amount of $765,000 agreed? Carried. Is subvote EX05, Cabinet Secretariat, in the amount of $512,000 agreed? Carried. Is subvote EX06, Members of the Executive Council, in the amount of $152,000. This is a statutory amount. No vote is required. Is subvote EX07, Premier's Office, in the amount of $492,000 agreed? Carried. Is subvote EX08, House Business and Research, in the amount of $248,000 agreed? Carried. Is subvote EX10, Intergovernmental Affairs, in the amount of $3,060,000 agreed? Carried. Is subvote EX12, Lieutenant Governor's Office, in the amount of $725,000 agreed? Carried. Resolved that they're being granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2023, the following sums for Executive Council. $12,994,000. Is that agreed?
Full signature here.
Okay. Right here?
Yeah. Full signature.
I'll say this motion is carried. This motion is carried.
And need to sign right there too.
Will you?
Yep.
There being no further business before the committee, I would invite a member to move that the committee rise, report progress, and ask for leave to sit again. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee rise, report progress, and ask for leave to sit again.
It has been moved that by the Government House Leader that the committee rise, report progress, and ask for leave to sit again. Is that agreed? Carried. Just wait for him to come back.
I recognize the chair of committees.
There we go.
Mr. Speaker, I'm instructed by the committee to report progress and ask for leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again? I recognize the Government House Leader.
Next sitting.
Next sitting. It now being that past the ordinary time of adjournment, this House now stands adjourned till 10 a.m. tomorrow.